It is the Doomsday Podcast, and Ed, it's great to be with you. I mean, you are at the Werder vacation home, but boy, by Thursday night you'll be in position. You'll be in position, and excited to hear. We've got Cowboys contracts. We got Micah Parsons to talk about. Ed, I'm more excited about the extension. Apparently, you may sign with WFAA Channel 8. I'd like to get the numbers on that, but we appreciate Rogue and Ed. It's always nice when people miss us and they're like, hey, are y'all going to do this? Or when are you doing your next thing? So that's always kind of nice. I'd rather them be that than, not hear from them. So this will be our official draft pre-draft special. And Ed, it coincides with the Cowboys brass, Stephen, Jerry, Brian Schottenheimer, the head coach, and Will McClay, who heads up the scouting department and does a lot of great work in that area, all came together today for a news conference. And Ed, it lasted a good long while, about an hour. It was a little bit late, but it somehow came in at about an hour, and it included a goodbye to one of our friends, David Moore, who is retiring. I didn't know you could even do that. Does people do that? I guess you save your money. I don't even understand how that works, but that's great for him. And so this will be his final act, I guess, is to cover this first Schottenheimer draft. But Ed, welcome in to the Doomsday Podcast.
Well, thank you. David Moore has been an influential person in my career, and a writer I've long respected. He helped bring me to Dallas, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram in 1989, that very pivotal time as Jerry Jones had just bought the franchise and hired Jimmy Johnson, and they drafted Troy Aikman. So he brought me to Dallas, or helped do so, with his colleague Marjorie Herrera Lewis. It's interesting that David is retiring before me. Far less accomplished, obviously, but he must have done quite well in the stock market, given what's happening in the country right now, and he still feels he has peace of mind to retire with the necessary resources to do so. But congratulations to David. I think he just went out there today so Jerry could talk about how much what a place in Cowboys history David holds. I can't wait to find out what my place in history might be in the next year or two.
He's been trying to send you into retirement for years, and
since 1989, pretty much.
Yeah. Man, who did he mention? Blackie Sherrod and Randy Galloway. Those were the two names that he brought up to compare him to. I'm sure there's some other folks out there that were like, well, why didn't he mention me? But that's okay. Two greats. Randy, who I still talk to almost on a daily basis. Blackie, we lost him a few years ago, but a legend. And David Moore now goes off to, apparently he even has, kind of like you, Ed, he has some kind of special place in the mountains. So good for him as he goes off to do his thing, and the rest of us will pick up the pieces and carry on. Who knows, Ed? Maybe the two of us should go back to beat writing. Maybe we should just take up the mantle and go try to break some stories and do that. You're still trying to a certain extent. It is time though, Ed. I mean, and I'll be brief because we don't want to hear the special music, but today was interesting in the fact that it was Brian Schottenheimer. This is his first draft. We'll hear kind of what that means to him. But Ed, I was curious to kind of get your take on, because it was long. I found some sort of interesting parts of it. There were some interesting sort of things about Micah Parsons that came up. And I thought there were some very interesting thoughts that came up about the quarterback and whether they'll take one or not. But Ed, I think we need to mention the fact that after the public part, where there's always kind of a little bit of sidebar where we all gather around Jerry, and he seemed to indicate that there were some significant trade opportunities, or the Cowboys were taking calls on some things. Now, the Cowboys like the drama. They like to create drama from time to time. So we don't know how significant this is or what he may be talking about. But that was an interesting aspect to say that there maybe were a couple of potential deals in the works.
Well, and the Cowboys have been active in the trade market this offseason. They have 11 first-round picks on their current roster, and 5 of them were acquired in free agency or acquired in trades. And so we don't know how significant these trade discussions are, but we do know that this is a time of the year where, teams value their draft collateral more than any other time. I mean, we're 48 hours from the start of the draft, and the Cowboys, to me, are in a position where they need to not only retain their most valuable picks here, but they need to execute them well. I mean, this is a draft where people say, hey, there's not a lot of, blue chip players, maybe just 6 or 7, but there are an exceptional number of high quality players all the way through the draft, and that this is a draft where teams should be trying to acquire, as many as 4 or 5 starting players. And the Cowboys have enough holes on their roster that we've seen that they need to be one of those teams to come through with 4 or 5 starters out of this draft. And so, I mean, I don't know who they're talking about. There have been rumors about the Broncos, willing to trade Cortland Sutton and go up higher in the draft to try to get a running back, which is also a position where the Cowboys have a lot of interest, running back. The Jets, if they were able to get a running back with their first round pick, they might trade, Bryce Hall, he's only 23 years old. He's rushed for nearly 1,000 yards in each of his first 2 pro seasons under, less than perfect circumstances, with the Jets offense being one of the worst in the NFL. So there's a lot of different things that they could be interested in. But I can't really see them giving up their 12th overall pick or 44 in the second round for a veteran player. I think there's too much value in the draft to make a move like that. If they're giving up late round picks for quality players, then that makes a lot more sense to me.
All right, quarterback, running back, so many things that'll be discussed. Cornerback came up. Breece Hall, of course, is who Ed is talking about. It is time, Ed, to get ready for today's episode. And by doing so, we will ask the Z-Man, we'll ask Zach to please play the music. All right. It is Ed Werder from Colorado. And Ed, happy birthday to young Delilah, your granddaughter. It's very exciting. Saw that on Facebook. I tried to react to that. I know you've got lots of activities planned, and maybe your grandson has a baseball game later today.
Football.
Football, sorry. Yeah, wrong sport, but he's got a football game. What is this, flag football? He's not old enough to play tackle, is he?
No, he's playing flag football. He's playing flag football and soccer right now, and we would like to be at his game this afternoon. We have yet to see him play flag football this season. We did see both kids play soccer the other day, and that was an epic adventure in sports history. So, that was nice. But, I think this is a really interesting, Cowboys draft. Will McClay, who's led the scouting department and the personnel department for quite some time in Dallas, has been very effective with these high picks, but really, really needing to redeem himself to some extent after Mozzie Smith in the first round and Tyler Guyton in the first round last year. The last time they picked 12th, obviously, was a move down for Micah Parsons, which turned out pretty well. And I know we're going to talk some more about Micah Parsons, but, to me, this team, so I went back and I collected a lot of statistical information about what was Mike McCarthy's final team. And I think we were all surprised that he wasn't brought back and extended. And I know he was really surprised. And Jerry has said that when they began their offseason dialogue, that he expected that to be the outcome, that Mike McCarthy would remain the coach. But when you go through and look at some of these facts from last season, this was a terrible football team last year. Now, I know they lost Dak Prescott, and they had a lot of other injuries to deal with. But I think there are a couple of things that really stand out and underline why this team, really needs to get explosive playmakers on the offensive side of the ball as a real priority. They averaged only 20.6 points per game last year. That's the lowest figure of the Dak Prescott era. They went from second in the NFL in scoring margin in 2023. They were plus 194 to 26th last year with minus 118. And according to Elias Sports, that 312-point difference, the third largest year-to-year drop in NFL history. They were the second worst team in the NFL in the red zone. They had the fewest rushing touchdowns, a terrible turnover differential, suffered some of their most embarrassing losses at home. They were second in the NFL in points allowed on defense. So, this team needs a dramatic off-season improvement in a lot of phases. But I think the thing that the coaches and the front office want to emphasize with these early picks are, if they can get a wide receiver, I think there's 2 receivers they would take in the first round, McMillan and Golden. And I've been told if neither of them are there, they could go for the best pass rusher, the best corner, or the best offensive lineman.
Yeah, and I find it interesting, and they have obviously starting with Tyron Smith, who just retired, and then now, Zach Martin has retired. That's when they started taking some first-round draft picks. Tyron, we think about Frederick, and Jerry seemed to indicate, we'll hear him talk about this, but that, he wants to say that it was way more the O-line's fault last year, that the running game struggled than any running backs. Okay. And to me, that is him circling back and defending himself for not trying to sign Derrick Henry, something which he continued to shoot down when it was brought up to him. And he thinks there are far bigger problems than who they had at running back. And that there may be some truth to that. I also find it interesting, Ed, that he almost seemed to be bragging that they don't have their board put together yet 2 days before the draft. Did you notice that? He's like, we're getting there. We're going to put it up today. I mean, and they admitted this is like the latest it's ever been. Now they use that as some sort of illustration of how good the communication is. They're still talking and they're still kind of getting it together. I didn't really know what to make of that, but I thought that was Jerry really wanted to make the point that the board has not completed yet. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's that. Maybe he was setting up what he was going to say later, that we're open to some deals. We're getting calls. I don't know what that involved, but they're still, and he jokingly said he would invite some people back there to look at the board. And the Cowboys infamously in the past have been known to allow their board to get out by inadvertently putting a shot of the board on their own webcam on their own website, correct?
Yeah, Jerry's accidentally done so in trying to, defend a decision that they've made with their board, that a player was rated higher than most people thought. I can't remember which year it was that he was photographed with the board behind him, and people obviously have the technology now to blow it up and be able to read it. And Will rejected that idea that Jerry, jokingly said he's going to take everybody back and show them the board. But to finish the Will McClay point, he said that there's usually between 15 and 18 first round grades. So that gives you a sense of how far they would be willing to move back if they were to make a trade on draft day. I think they've made 72 draft day trades in the Jerry Jones era. So that obviously would remain a possibility that they could make a trade while still on the clock, depending on what happens in front of them and what kind of offers they get from teams eager to move up.
Okay, and obviously what Jerry wants to start with, and he brought it up today, is if he's being positive. Somebody asked, what would you tell your fans? Why should they be excited about the draft or something? And Jerry started with the nucleus, right? Look at our quarterback. It always comes back to look at how much we're paying our quarterback. Not really. It's more about that than how great the quarterback is. And it's look at Micah Parsons. Look at this nucleus. And of course, he could end up holding out. There was one interesting moment where Stephen has made that point to me in the past that you better be really good if you want to hold out on this team, right? If you're going to be a holdout. And so Jerry was basically asked if he's worried now about Micah Parsons being a holdout, because obviously, even though they've agreed to some things, they haven't come to terms or they haven't, found totally common ground. To Jerry's response was, no, I'm not worried about that at all. Almost kind of like he invites it, almost kind of like, hey, if that happens, it happens. But it is interesting, their approach, which seems to be a very wait approach. And I know there are two sides to everything, but isn't it interesting that a team that almost has this puffed out chest about you better be a great player if you're going to hold out on us, and yet we can point now to CD, Zeke, Zach Martin. Honestly, they always lose on these holdouts. And, there's no reason right now Micah Parsons should fold and sign any kind of team-friendly deal, because he's going to get his in the end if he holds out, right?
Well, he offered a team-friendly deal at the end of the regular season. In fact, the most interesting thing that Jerry has said in terms of the Micah Parsons contract negotiations has been that he's equivocating, he's delaying, it's not a priority because he wants to see something from Micah. He wants Micah to validate being one of the highest paid non-quarterbacks, if not the highest paid non-quarterback in football, by demonstrating that he's going to be a better leader than he's been in the past. And many of us have taken that to suggest that Jerry wants to see him participate in the offseason fully in a way that he hasn't previously. And we know there was the rift between he and DeMarcus Lawrence, and that became public when Lawrence left and as a free agent signed with Seattle and seemingly took a couple shots at Micah Parsons over his podcasting affinity. But I thought at the end of last season, Parsons did show some positive leadership development in that he came back from his injury to play hard and play well and was very productive, even though really the team had very little to play for when he was healthy after that high ankle sprain. And not everybody who suffered injuries came back as quickly as he did. And he also, while he threw Mike McCarthy under the bus, questioning his work ethic at one point in comments after a loss, he also at the end of the season talked about, hey, I don't have to be the highest paid defensive player in football. I don't need $40 million a year. I want good players around me. And if I were Jerry and Stephen, I would have tried to get him signed that day and make him honor that promise. And instead, Jerry's delayed for whatever reasons. But he reiterated again. He said something again to the effect of, I need to make sure, when I'm paying somebody this amount of money, that they're going to provide the kind of leadership that justifies this investment.
I think he's obviously always felt great about Dak's leadership. Yet one of the reasons he held out in not making that deal as long as he could, Dak has now been injured enough that is a significant issue. And again, they always want to think the best, right? He's going to make it. He's going to be fine. And yet the games that he's missed over his career have started to pile up. So he should still be in his prime. He is making $60 million a year. And the question was brought up at today's press conference about what would you do if the sort of the exciting scenario came and Jackson Dart or Shedeur Sanders, and a lot of people, Ed, are mocking Shedeur Sanders to go maybe to the Saints at number 9. Some people think that might be as far as he, quote unquote, falls. But would Jerry at number 12, would he somehow get that excited because of his relationship with Dion and probably having known Shedeur for all these years? And so the question was asked about the quarterback position in that context. And we wanted to let you hear Jerry's answer to that question because I thought it was rather interesting.
Yeah, well, we've got a major commitment with Dak, and so you weigh all of that. And but I was going to add to this whole conversation, it's very often that somebody will step up and say, "Now we got this guy right here. We've got him, and we just signed him under contract." But guess what? Guys get hurt. So you bet your whole house that you got him, and then all of a sudden you don't have him. So that's when your old mind starts saying, well, if this guy did get hurt, what would we do this year? There you go. There you go. But don't misinterpret. All I'm saying is that you have to figure that rather than say we've got him, we don't have that need, you have to figure that there's some injury to be. Now, how important is that player as opposed to the one you're looking at on the board? And could he fill that need right there? I do that. I really do. And so if we've got depth and that guy gets hurt, that's one thing. If you're left out in the cold for right now, and you need that. That's another thing.
Now, Ed, in that answer, and it kept coming up, and Jerry sort of on his own later brought up how much, hey, this is the highest paid player. He brought up the fact that, there's always that injury thing. You got to know, you got to be ready. And so I think his point was, would that quarterback that you could get at 12, how much do you need that compared to the player, the wide receiver you mentioned, Matthew Golden, or the player out of Arizona? How much was that? And I think there's no way they do that. But man, Jerry does not mind talking about that topic, even to the point where he circled back around and he brought up the fact, and boy, you were just talking about earlier about you came into the market 1989 around then, and you remember, and you and Aikman have always had a really good relationship for the most part, I would say. You go on trips with him now from time to time. But they famously or infamously, Jimmy and Jerry drafted in the supplemental draft Steve Walsh when they already had Aikman as the first round pick, and it made Aikman extremely uncomfortable. I know he had to hate the deal. You remember when that happened, and I thought that was interesting that Jerry brought it up, because what the point Jerry really wanted to make is, look what we did with that.
We drafted a quarterback for the purpose of trading, a first round pick to a quarterback for the purpose of trading. Like, nobody in NFL history has ever done what the Cowboys did that year. They drafted Troy Aikman number 1 overall, and then in the supplemental draft, they used their first round pick the following year after a 1-15 season to have Steve Walsh. And, I remember Troy telling me that the thing that irritated him the most about that transaction, and it really affected in a very negative way his relationship and his willingness to trust Jerry or Jimmy for years early in his career, was they warned him that he was leaving Dallas to go to Oklahoma in the offseason, and they said, hey, we just heads up, we might take Tim Rosenbaugh, in the supplemental draft, but it'll be purely for the purpose of trading him. And that's a whole different thing than taking Steve Walsh, because Steve Walsh had won a national championship for Jimmy Johnson and so many members of that Cowboys coaching staff that had come from Miami with him, that Troy didn't feel, that the organization was fully committed to him, that many of the coaches, in fact, they went around the table at one point with the coaching staff, like who supports Aikman as a starter, who thinks Walsh should be the starter, before, one of the coaches stood up and said, this is nonsense. Aikman's the guy. And clearly Jerry was paying Aikman like he was the franchise quarterback. But that was Jerry's point, was, hey, don't dismiss this possibility, because we have drafted a quarterback and kept him on our roster for a year before trading him for great value. I can't see them doing that here. I mean, they just did this. They just gave up. It'd be the Trey Lance thing, only worse, because there's almost no chance if Dak stays healthy, he gets on the field, and you're going to get a 5-year contract out of him, and Dak's going to be your quarterback for at least the next 4 years. So I don't see how that makes any sense. Quarterback can't be a priority over these other receivers. And the reason a quarterback would be there at 12 is because, there's plenty of quarterback needy teams above the Cowboys, picking above the Cowboys. So if they don't want one of these quarterbacks, why should the Cowboys want one of them?
Yeah, it seems odd. And that is one way. And Ed, you and I have covered some of these things over the years. The minute I was at Radio City Music Hall, and Ed was always like at a team's facility, a lot of times the Cowboys, some otherwise. But I was there when the Eagles picked Kevin Cobb from University of Houston in the second round, and it immediately made Donovan McNabb uncomfortable. It created issues within the building. Now, Lance was such a bust as a player before they traded for him. I don't really think it had that much of an impact on Dak, as I recall. I don't think Dak had that much of a, but you and I have both seen in buildings. Even this past year, the guy from University of Washington, Michael Penix, Atlanta, spends real money, on a quarterback.
$100 million for Kirk.
Correct.
And before he plays a single game.
They go get Penix at number, 15? number 9. Number 9. They picked Penix at number 9. And so, of course, Cousins, who's a good guy, is just like, wait, what are you doing? I mean, he's making calls like, why in the world could you do this? So I don't think the Cowboys can do it here, but it's interesting that Jerry loves the talking point so much.
Matt, if the Giants don't want to take a quarterback at 2, and the Browns don't, or at 3, and the Browns don't want to take a quarterback at 2, and the Saints don't take a quarterback at 9, why in the world would a team with Dak Prescott use a first-round pick on a quarterback thinking they could trade him for something of great value?
Yeah, I don't think it would be because of the trade anymore. Like, I honestly think it would only be because Jerry is just in love with the Sanders family. That's not even about, hey, we could trade him for something. It would be more of a Sanders related type deal. All right, Ed, let's get to a couple of these other talking points. Running back comes up. We'll hear more about like Brian Schottenheimer's take on all this. Here's one thing I found interesting, and they keep coming back to this. You and I were hearing kind of rumblings that I think the scouting department, Will McClay being in charge of all that, I think they were very happy with how this all turned out. I'm not saying they hated McCarthy or anything like that, but there seems to be a belief that Schottenheimer maybe has a little more respect and a little more vision and trust in the scouts and wanting to hear what the scouts have to say. And I'm not trying to be unfair to McCarthy, but I sense from Will McClay and others that, man, this has been, and we'll see who they pick. They may end up getting a bunch of bad draft picks. I don't know. They usually pick pretty well. I sense that they're kind of excited about Schottenheimer's presentation, and that was part of the thing they did today. They said, "Hey, you've got some pretty young coaches, some inexperienced guys, some people with more college backgrounds than NFL. Are they really even going to know what this process is like?" And he went out of his way to say, "No, these are the people I've brought in are very convicted. They don't hold back." Jerry seemed to kind of echo that. In fact, he said something along the lines of, Brian has been getting after my ass a little bit in some of these meetings. But Ed, I don't want to read too much into this, but I'm getting the sense that this scouting department are really liking the change and feel that it's kind of refreshing in the whole communication leading up to this draft.
Well, the hard thing, I think, for Will McClay and the scouting department is, Matt Eberflus, for example, is their 3rd defensive coordinator in 3 years. So they're drafting players for a 3rd different coordinator and a 3rd different style of defense to some extent. And so that complicates the decision-making process. And then Eberflus inherits players that maybe don't necessarily fit what he wants. And he doesn't have any real investment in them. But yeah, I think one of the things that they believe that they will benefit from in the way that Brian Schottenheimer, who, keep in mind, Schottenheimer is doing 2 jobs now that he didn't do last year. He's never been a head coach in the NFL before, and he wasn't the play caller here last year. And now he's going to have both of those responsibilities. But they do like the fact that he's hired coaches, some of whom are coming from college directly, who in these drafts are now assessing, evaluating players that they've known. Like, they recruited some of these players to come play for them in college. And so maybe they know them a little better than other coaches, than coaches on Mike McCarthy's staff who've been in the NFL and not recently been exposed to college football players would. They've also made a big, as we talked about, they've prioritized the offensive line. Clayton Adams, the offensive coordinator's offensive line coach his whole career with the Cardinals before this. And then Riley from Kansas State, comes here as an expert on the offensive line. So they've got a receivers coach who just came from college, who's recruited, the Ohio State player, Ibuka?
Emeka, yeah. Ibuka, yeah.
And so you've got a lot of coaches who have direct connections to players you're now evaluating and considering, bringing onto your team, who can make the comparison with what you have versus what that player would do for that position. And there could be a lot of benefit to that.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think Schottenheimer comes across really well, like really knowledgeable, very engaging. He's not at all condescending. I think you can see every time he speaks publicly how he could have turned Jerry and Steven away from McCarthy and made them feel like he needed to be the next head coach, rather than, as they said when they introduced him, there was no scenario where he was coming back as the offensive coordinator not calling plays. There was no scenario where we were going to have McCarthy with Schottenheimer on the staff. It was one or the other, because Schottenheimer had opportunities to go call plays elsewhere.
All right, and I wish you would say that word like Jerry says it. I like today when Jerry said condescending. I like to add a little something to it, okay? Almost like there are drops of sweat or water coming down. Condescending is how Jerry said it today. Okay, I wanted to have our folks hear a little bit more, because Ed, not everybody has our kind of schedule where you can just sit around and listen to Jerry all day speak. And so some folks might want to hear this and hear us react to it. We'll stay with Shotty for a second, the man we call Shotty. You and I think just refer to him as Brian when we see him in person. And I think you and I will sit down with him at some point. We have in the past. I know you had a one-on-one at Doomsday a few years ago at a training camp, and that was good. I think you had a peek inside the future head coach of the Cowboys. I don't know if you knew yet, Ed. By the way, Ed, you sound really good, by the way. You have Ed's closer to the camera than usual. And just to pull back the curtain a little bit, Ed broke some equipment right before the show started, but you sound really good there from Colorado.
And not in a fit of rage.
No.
Oh, yeah. A fit of rage, like some people might suspect, because that did somehow happen to a few tennis rackets and maybe a golf club or two. But no, this was totally accidental.
Yeah, those rackets. I think we probably should not, even though I'm playing a ton of tennis now, both of us can be a little bit volatile when we get competitive. And I don't know, certainly you've indicated to me that the fact that I hit a lot of drop shots would not please you. So we probably ought to stay off the courts, and possibly because I don't like to play against former college players. Even if I let you get about 10 years older, I still think there could be issues out there. Okay. Brian Schottenheimer was asked a question about like how, he's talked about how important the running game is. Cowboys are, rumored, I guess they could take one at 12. I don't think they will. It's more likely in the second or third round, or even later, the Cowboys. We've seen them go through whole drafts when they desperately needed a running back and take one.
Drafted a quarterback or a wide receiver in the first 4 rounds since they took CeeDee Lamb in 2020. That's the fewest in the NFL. They haven't drafted a running back in 4 of the last 5 years. They've drafted 43 players in that time. The only running back they drafted, Deuce Vaughn, in the 6th round in 2023. That's how they've ignored that position.
Who's more of a gadget player? I mean, Deuce is fun, but
himself in any way in the NFL at this point.
No, he's a small man.
It's a great story when he was drafted.
Yeah.
He has not yet been able to secure, a regular position and a regular role on the team.
Mm-hmm. He's hidden not only behind the offensive line, but hidden from all of us. But who knows? Who knows what will happen? Maybe he'll break through. But Schottenheimer was asked about, like, how important is it, the actual runner? Is it just about committing to the running game, or is it about getting a runner? And you'll hear him. And then on the back end of this, Jerry does get involved, and Jerry has thoughts on the O-line's role in the success of last year's, or the lack thereof, the running game.
For you personally, how much do you think the running back matters in your offensive scheme?
I think the runners, they matter. It's one of the aspects. You can do it a lot of different ways. I've done it a lot of different ways in my career, whether it's by committee, whether it's a guy that's seen as the bell cow. I think this is an incredibly deep draft at running back. You can find guys that, again, when you're watching them on film, you see the traits and the things that you like. You can have a vision for them, what they would look like fitting into our scheme that, Clayton and the staff are going to put together. But again, I think, it's a position like others where it's not just the player. It's the talent, all those things, but it's also the person, the wiring. Like you're hearing us say that across the board here, the person matters. The football character, the love of the game, those things matter. And I think there's a number of those guys at that position in this draft that we're excited about.
And then building upon that for Jerry, we've seen you take Ezekiel Elliott really high in the draft, and then we've seen this team not emphasize the running back. Seeing somebody like Saquon Barkley and what he did for Philadelphia last year, has your thought about the running back position changed from what it might have been from the future?
Well, Saquon and Philadelphia got your attention. There's no question about it. It'd be dead if you're doing what we do and not see that happen. I don't think that running back was as significant last year and us not getting where we wanted to go as you do, and maybe others. I don't. I think it was our offensive line that was the bigger impact of the running back situation. Now, you say, well, but still, you didn't have that. You had an opportunity to get those kinds of running backs. I would say that got my attention. I would say. Now, we hit on a Murray in the 4th round here a few years back, and he was a doggone good running back. Ooh, look at that offensive line he had in front of him. Think about it. Look at that offensive line that Zeke had in front of him. And so I get it completely, the lack of having our offense. It hurt us a little bit to lose Dak early, and y'all know that's condescending as far as the running game was concerned. That didn't help the running game. So this is not excuse time here, but it is appropriate that you'd ask that question, because can you cure the running game with the back? You can help it, in my mind.
Okay, Ed, obviously Schottenheimer, I think, is going to. We were used to a head coach who talked a lot about the run game. It really wasn't in his background. He was always more comfortable, with the passing game. This head coach, at times, I think even he and Pete Carroll at times had a little bit of disagreement. We saw in the balance and should you be running more, should you be throwing the ball more, and that kind of thing. I do think there'll be a commitment to the run game. You heard his take on it. And then, as only Jerry could, Jerry used the opportunity to, whoever asked the question wasn't even, I think, assuming or wasn't saying how bad the running game or the running backs were last year, but Jerry sort of took it that way. And he's like, you maybe think the running game was a struggle for different reasons than what I think it was. And what Jerry came around to it, he thought it was more on the offensive line. And he used it as an opportunity to talk about how huge the offensive line is in all of this. But to me, Ed, and I think I mentioned to you earlier, I feel like this is a very sensitive topic for Jerry, because in the middle of their quarterback getting hurt, them getting off to an awful start last year, the fact that Derrick Henry got off to an incredible start, including a game against the Cowboys early in the season, that kept getting brought up to Jerry. And it's a sore spot with him that they did not go into the season with a frontline type running back that anybody would have spent any actual money on.
Well, look what Saquon Barkley did for the Eagles. And the Cowboys weren't involved with him either. Now, salary was obviously an issue for them, but not for Philadelphia. And he was Offensive Player of the Year in Philadelphia. Set, the franchise rushing record, became a 9th 2,000-yard rusher in NFL history, and won a Super Bowl. And now the Cowboys have to face him and the best running quarterback in football in Jaden Daniels with the Commanders. But the Cowboys were 30th in the NFL in rushing per attempt last year. They averaged 4 yards a carry. Rico Dowdle, did anybody really think Rico Dowdle was something special? I never did. He's just a guy to me. Tony Pollard, he was a dynamic player. If I go all the way back to the last playoff loss in San Francisco, the Cowboys went into that game with 2 dynamic playmakers, CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard. And Pollard got hurt in the first half, and everybody pretty much quit after that. But this is a team that hasn't had enough dynamic playmakers on offense in a really long time. And to me, that's what they need to resolve in this draft, and that needs to be the priority. They've got to hope that they weren't wrong about Tyler Guyton last year. Last year they traded down and from 24 to 29, and they drafted Tyler Guyton to be their starting left tackle. They didn't really want it to happen the way it did, where Udoga, the veteran journeyman, that they brought in to be the starter in the offseason, got hurt early in training camp, and Guyton was kind of just given the job by default, and then started the season as a left tackle. And then they also had a rookie center, and that was the first time since 2011 that they've started 2 rookies on the same offensive line. And at the end of the year, this is what spoke to me about Guyton and where he stood with the coaching staff. These coaches were, they were working to keep their jobs at the end of the season, and they weren't playing Tyler Guyton. They were playing Edoga, a veteran journeyman, over him. And so to me, Guyton's got to prove himself this year. He's got to justify being a first-round draft pick this year. And even Duke Mayweather, who, helped prepare him for the draft, said this is on him now. And to me, I think the offensive line was a huge part of their problem, and it's not going to be any better if they don't add to that position in this draft unless these coaches can get more out of the players that they inherit. Because, Zach Martin wasn't quite himself, but until he suffered that second injury last year, he was still an elite player on that offensive line. And now they've lost, Tyron Smith and Zach Martin, 2 potential Hall of Fame players off that offensive line in the last 2 years. And the 2 players they took in the first round last year need to justify the investment the Cowboys have made in them.
It's interesting to hear you say that and to think about Jerry today talking about how they needed, premium picks and how huge the O-line. It was more on the O-line than the running backs. And now, Romo briefly had a pretty good line, right? At the beginning of some of those guys' careers, they played with Romo. They were coming up, Tyron, Martin, he got some of Frederick. And so he briefly had a time. But there was a time when he thought Romo had enough talent. He did not think of the premium O-line. He was like, this guy's good enough to lift an O-line, which at one point was kind of headlined by Andre Gerard, who was fine, who had a fine career, but, wasn't some sort of perennial all-pro type. He grew into a nice player. But it's interesting because Dak, I think, has been injured enough, doesn't run enough anymore, doesn't do the things.
He's not a dual-threat quarterback anymore.
No.
He was early in his career. That's what made him special and so effective early in his career.
Yeah.
But I think he can win from the pocket if they can protect him. And that's what that has to be the priority for Dak. I know he talks about wanting to run and using his mobility, and that needs to be part of his game. But I think he has to recognize he's going to be 32 years old. This is his 10th season as a starter, and he's missed the majority of games twice in the last 5 years with leg injuries requiring surgery, all on plays where he was running out of the pocket. And so, but part of that is he feels that he has to do that because they don't have an adequate running game without that dimension. And so this offseason, I think Schottenheimer, like he said, Seattle, when he was calling the plays in Seattle, they twice led the NFL in rushing. And so I think his vision for this offense is more, hey, Dak's going to be under center. They were 31st in the NFL last year in play action passing. There's going to be a lot more play action passing. Dak's going to be under center. He needs to be used like Jared Goff. And so I see them using a lot less shotgun, upgrading their weapons at running back and wide receiver, creating more explosive plays with Dak under center. Okay,
I've kind of been zeroing in. There's a Tennessee running back I'd like them to look at. There's actually somebody from Iowa in the second and third rounds. So Dr. Draft will probably circulate here pretty soon and give out his 3 locks and provide that. And I'd like to get you on the record as we wrap this up. Number 12 overall pick. I'll just say, I don't want to steal any of your thunder. Hopefully I've got a different player than you. If we have the same player, it's fine. I just kind of think where he played, the speed, the route running, almost everything about him. To me, Golden seems like the player that they're going to take at 12. I mean, again, they may, who knows, will slip there. Who knows if there's an edge rusher that they fall in love with, or maybe an O-lineman. But I'm going to go with Golden as my pick for the Cowboys. Are you leaning one way or another, or will you go on the record with your prediction, please?
Well, like I said, I do think that if one of the two receivers is available, that would be their pick. And I think the two receivers, it hasn't been confirmed, but I assume it's, McMillan from Arizona and Golden from Texas. Obviously the interesting thing about McMillan is he's 6'4", great on 50-50 type plays, had 40 contested catches, including 15. He's 5 inches taller than Golden, 28 pounds heavier, but one of 5 FBS players to average 100 yards receiving per game last year. He had a 300-yard game, a 200-yard game, and 3 100-yard receiving games for Arizona last year. So I think he's performed at a much higher level than Golden has. But Golden is a different kind of player than the Cowboys currently have. Like, he's a smaller player, but an explosive, ran 4.29, which I think was the fastest for any combine player. But he's, McMillan is a first down machine. He's a red zone guy, and I already talked about how desperate the Cowboys are for improvement in the red zone. But yeah, Golden, if McMillan's gone, I think Golden is a great pick. Consistently gets open, creates explosive plays, yards after the catch. The concern would be he's not just been terribly productive game to game to game to game. I mean, he only averages like 61 receiving yards a game in his career.
All right. In the second round, I just hope Jerry will go back to that, biggest character concerns available. Just he used to love.
They can't risk a pick here.
Any kind of injury, anybody that had an injury or something like that had huge value, would have been a first-round pick, but had injuries. That's how they got Jalen Smith. That's how they got a linebacker in the first round with neck issues years ago. But I think Jerry has gotten away from that a little bit. He does love the value in some of those type players, but boy, they need to treat the second round, and maybe they always do. But boy, to your point, with the holes they have. This is not just 1 or 2 starters. This is multiple starters, and they have, hit on some people in the 5th round in recent years, that kind of thing. But you'd like to have 3 or 4 starters from this draft, and they've got a lot of picks. Okay, some of them are 7th round picks and that kind of thing. How many is it, Ed? They've got, is it 10 or 11? They've got
10 picks.
10 picks. Okay. And I think the most in the NFL is 11. So they've got 10. And once Jerry starts trading down and really working that board, he'll pick up some more. All right. Ed, last thing I wanted to share with our audience is Brian Schottenheimer said toward the end of today's news conference, and this was the Cowboys Pre-Draft News Conference, he was asked by David Moore, the final question David will ever ask. I'm sure David will be there to cover the draft, so he'll maybe get one more. But any sort of significance to having that, his first pick as a head coach, pick as a head coach with the Cowboys, does that lend any sort of extra significance? Or what is that, what does he think about that? And here was his answer.
Well, I mean, it's a big step, but I wouldn't say that it's a symbolic moment for me. We're going to add great players throughout this entire draft, and it doesn't end after the draft ends. We're going to find and continue to keep looking under every stone to find guys that fit into what we want to do as a culture and what adds value to our team. But I know one thing, whoever we add on Thursday night, it will be through tremendous amounts of hard work from the top down, from Jerry Stephen, Will, Mitch, Chris Vaughn, the entire scouting department, the coaches, and it will be someone that's going to make the Cowboys fans proud.
All right, Ed, I mean, I think he said the right way. I'm not going to, it's important. It's meaningful to me. But at the same time, it's not like I'm going to, this is going to define my whole career. I think he was asked if it was symbolic of anything. And yeah. I think his answer, like what Parcells or almost any coach would say, is kind of like to bat that away. I don't really see any symbolism. We need to take a lot of really good football players. And that's what you would expect a guy like Schottenheimer to say.
Yeah, I think the reason that question came up was because, last week when Tyron Smith retired as the first player that Jason Garrett drafted as a head coach. Garrett made a big deal out of, this kind of spoke to the kind of team we were going to be and the identity we were going to create. And Jerry said it did change their philosophy about drafting offensive linemen in the first round, because until then they hadn't done it since like 1981. And then obviously soon they drafted Zach Martin for the offensive line and Travis Frederick on the offensive line. And that having, that kind of offensive line justified in their minds picking Ezekiel Elliott 4th overall at running back. And obviously Zeke led the league in rushing twice. So they justified that pick in my mind. The first pick in the first round for Cowboys coaches is a pretty illustrious list. Jimmy Johnson's was obviously Troy Aikman. Barry Switzer had a bad one with Shante Carver. Then Chan Gailey's first pick was Greg Ellis. Bill Parcells' first pick was Terrence Newman. Dave Campbell, of course, didn't have a first-round pick his first year. Poor guy. Wade Phillips' first pick was Anthony Spencer. Garrett was Tyron Smith, and Mike McCarthy was CeeDee Lamb. So if they pick a player that belongs on the list with most of those players, then I think Schottenheimer will be well on his way to turning the fortunes of this team around.
Did you say Landry's first pick?
I did not say Landry's first pick. This is the Jerry era Cowboys.
Okay, because it would have been Bob Lilly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not bad.
It's a good pick.
I mean, that's
not
a
many
good
better than that.
No, Mr. Cowboy himself. In fact, he was just speaking recently at an event. Ed, good job. And again, we came in right on time. I had said to you, why don't we do a really strong 30 minutes? And it looks like we've gone about 51 minutes. Okay, so we only went 20 minutes. I hope the Z-Man. I hope Zach. I'm sure he has people waiting in the wings. But
little editing.
He always puts doomsday.
Light editing.
Oh, light editing. All right. We preferred, as writers, no editing.
Exactly.
I think some people thought, what did the guys say to you, for a game story, this was a pretty good column or something like that. They thought you were
said, put my picture in the paper and give me a raise and call it a column. I don't care.
You thought you were injecting some opinions into it. Now there are no rules. The columnists,
I was ahead of my time, Matt.
I think you were. I think you've always been ahead of your time. Hey, happy birthday to Delilah. Hope Henry has a good effort tonight. Don't overdo it out there. It's your first game, so don't try to send in too many plays, or I could see you wandering out there installing some plays, perhaps going with some, explaining to them what the jumbo package.
What they do have a 12 coach who has wristbands. He has wristbands for all the players on offense.
I like that. Who was the first person you ever saw with a wristband? Do you remember, what quarterback?
It seems like it was somebody who was either young or injured. I can't remember who it would have been.
The first I ever saw was, and this makes sense because I don't know, because I was going to say because it's a smart thing to do, but I always kind of at first thought as guys that couldn't memorize the plays, but it was the Rice Owls. And it was a guy who ended up being an NFL player, and his name was Bert Emanuel, and he ended up playing some wide receiver. But I do remember. Yeah. Go ahead.
For the Falcons, he played. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. He played for the Falcons. All right, Ed, tremendous work. You have a great time. I'll see you back here for the draft Thursday evening. We'll be trying to bring it all to you, and then we'll have some post-draft things we bring to you. We'll break down how they do. We'll give our grades, that kind of thing, and then Ed and I usually get out there and talk to some of the new picks. We've really pulled some good ones off over the years. And we've had some good conversations. So we'll have all of that coming up, but I wanted to get you our special pre-draft Doomsday episode. Ed, appreciate you, buddy.
Good to see you, buddy.
For Ed Werder, I am Matt Mosley. This has been the Doomsday Podcast, and for Rogue Media Network and our man Z. Good night, everybody.
We are Rogue Media Sports.